Christian, we met first, I believe, in 1967 in Neskapstad in Iceland. It was completely by chance. We were both working at the same herring plant. It was October 1967. The winter had just set in. We'd arrived in Neskapstad, which is on the east coast of Iceland, by road. The snow came in behind us, blocking the road and the runway. There was no way out. We were forced to be in each other's company day and night for the next 4 months, during which time we became friends.
So, but in one way I would like to be interested to know how you go, in what way, how could you go to Iceland in that time? Just on yourself, alone and everything. Who drove you there?
An interesting question that, but I remember the reason very well. When I was at college, I used to spend the summer holidays, the summer vacation, working in a big shop in the centre of London called Gamage's. Now Gamage's was a shop that sold everything. It was a department store, and it's now no longer in London, unfortunately. But I was working there one summer in '65, and I met a man who interested me in as much as he was very intelligent, almost too intelligent to be working in the shop. Not that there was anything wrong with working in a shop, but obviously he was cut out to do better things. So I asked him why, when he was working in the shop, and he said, well, Brian, I spend the summer working in Iceland on the herring, and then I come back to London, just complete my affairs, and I have enough money saved up from my trip in Iceland to spend the rest of the winter in Spain, in the warmth. Now that stuck in my mind. And when my father said, what do you want to do, immediately after you leave college? I said, well, Father, I want to go to Iceland. And he said, you're in luck, because being in the shipping business, he was able to get me a cheap ticket to go by sea, third class passage. I'm sure nobody travels third class anymore. It was one of those ancient classes that's been done away with. So it was in 1967, I found myself sailing away on a vessel from the north of Scotland up to Iceland. My father and mother, my mother with a little tear in her eye, as she waved goodbye to me. She probably thought she'd never see her son again. And I sailed off into the distance. We had 3 days, non-stop party on the boat. It was absolutely fantastic. Full of Australians, full of Americans, full of British, all people I'd never met before in London, where I lived in North London. So after 3 days of just party day and night, the best time I've ever had in my life on the boat, we landed in Reykjavik. I had no idea what I was going to do, absolutely no idea. So I just followed everybody else, and everybody walked up to the youth hostel on the hill in Reykjavik, overlooking the bay. And that evening, everybody found out that there were no herring. So the following morning, everybody in the youth hostel went back down to the harbour and got the boat back to Scotland. There was no work, no money. These were all professional travellers, they needed the money. So no herring, no work, off they went. Me, the return fare back to Scotland was the equivalent of £12 sterling. I had in my pocket £9. I'd arrived in Iceland to spend the best part of a year, and I had £9 in my pocket. Naively, I thought that £9 would be enough to keep me going until I got a job. I was wrong. That night, in the youth hostel, all my new friends that I had the most fantastic time with for the last 4 nights, 3 nights on the boat, and 1 night in the youth hostel, all gone back to Scotland. I was completely and utterly alone. And I thought, what on earth am I doing here? There's no way to get back to London, not without ringing up my father and asking him to send me more money, and that would be just impossible to do because it would be so embarrassing. So I decided the next day to hitchhike around the island, see if I could find some work. So I borrowed a little blanket from the youth hostel the next day, paid them the £1 rent for the 3 nights. I bought a loaf of bread and some cheese, and I walked out of the town and started hitchhiking. And very quickly found myself in the middle of nowhere. And I spent the next 2 or 3 months hitchhiking all the way around the island. I went round once, I came back to the beginning again, I went round again. Eventually, I found myself in a town in the north called Akureyri, and I met a man who had a trawler. I was in a bar having a drink, and this trawlerman was there. He says, "I'm the captain of the boat." He said, "How would you like a fortnight's work on the trawler?" I took it straight away. I must admit I lied a bit and said that I actually had worked on trawlers before in England, but I thought I'd be able to bullshit my way through it. Not quite the case, unfortunately. Working on a trawler is a very skillful job, and it very quickly becomes apparent that you've never done it before. But anyway, I found myself on the boat, and the important thing was I had food. I was travelling around Iceland with barely any food. I couldn't afford, more than one loaf of bread every 3 days, and I'd knock on people's doors and ask for a glass of milk and maybe a cake. And I'd lay awake at night dreaming of beans on toast or fried egg sandwich. I'd never dreamt about food before that, and I've never dreamt about food since. But I spent 2 months starving to death, so I found myself on this boat. Icelandic boats aren't like English boats, they have 2 chefs. One of the chefs spends all day making bread and cakes. So as we steamed up to the Arctic Circle through the stormy weather, I spent the first 2 or 3 days scoffing cake after cake after cake. I was having a fantastic time. Life was good again. 14 days later, we came back. They took out the fish. I got my wages. And then they said, there's more money to come. This really surprised me. I thought, the wages were enough. It's more money than I'd ever had before. He said, no, you get a share of the catch. Come back tomorrow. I went back the next day. And to my surprise, I was given the equivalent of another £200-300, which is like 4, 5, 6 months' wages in England at that time. I was a rich man. I went out on the trawler again, did another fortnight. Came back again, more money. I had loads of money. So then I thought, no more work. I took a plane back to Reykjavik, moved into a hotel, party every night, had a fantastic time. There was a herring plant that I'd made contact with some time before, who said that the herring were due around about October time, and they offered me a job when the herring arrived. I'd ring them every couple of days, and after about 4 weeks in Reykjavik, having a fantastic time, I rang the herring plant and they said, yeah, come straight away, because we're expecting the herring to arrive any second. So I jumped on a plane, straight across, landed in Neskapstad, drove from the airport into the town exactly the day the winter started. The snow fell, as I said earlier, behind me. I found myself in Neskapstad, impossible to leave.
And it's where you met me, then.
And then a few days later,
yeah.
we were sleeping in sort of bunk beds, 4, 5, 6 to a room. The foreman came down and he says, hello, I have another Frenchman in the room with you. And this French fellow, very arrogant, walked in, and it was Christian Galicia, and I thought, French, everybody hates the French. But it turned out he weren't so bad. And we worked very hard for 2-3 months in Iceland, and we became good friends at that time. So that's how I met you, Christian.
Yeah, and if you remember that the work was very hard. We was working from morning to the night, Could you explain a bit the work we was doing?
The thing about herring is...
When it was coming, the full boat of herring and everything. Could you explain in a few words what was the job?
Well, the thing about herring is that they come very close to the shore when they come. And they come in huge shoals, billions and billions of fish. And they're very close, so you have to be very quick, because the herring shoal only stays for so long and then it goes on. So the boats fish the herring, they bring them in, and they dump the whole load into the herring plant. The fish are immediately put onto a conveyor belt. Women are all lined up. That's the front line. They cut the fish. The men stand by to bring more salt for the fish and to take away the full 45-gallon barrels of fish when they're finished. So this continues, until the fish are gone. Sometimes you could work all night, from 8 o'clock at night till 8 o'clock in the morning sometimes.
And we did.
And we did, quite often. Because while the fish were there, they kept coming and coming and coming. The only respite we got, the only time you could stop work was if the weather was so bad that the herring boats couldn't go out. And the weather was very bad, quite a lot, so we did have a lot of spare time to play around. And the only other time you could stop work was if the temperature dropped below -40. And it did that too. And the men had to work outside, piling the barrels up in great big piles of fish. And every day they had to be turned over upside down. And this was a very dangerous job, because you were working 20 foot, 50, sort of 6-7 meters in the air, turning big barrels of fish over. And these barrels of fish could weigh, I don't know, 200, 300 kilos of fish.
So I remember that we were very, very tired in the evening. Sometimes we were knockouts, we were just...
Oh, God, yeah.
I have still some picture that in the evening we are just like a dead people. Do you remember that?
Yeah. You worked and worked and worked, non-stop. Except, every now and then when the weather gave you a little bit of respite and they could put some salt on the runway, a plane could come in. And the thing about a plane arriving is they could bring alcohol. Because in Neskapstad, you could buy no alcohol at all. Iceland had 5 alcohol shops at that time, and all of them were in Reykjavik, nowhere else. So we used to mail order, telephone order our alcohol, and when the runway was open, the alcohol would arrive, and we'd all drive down to the airport together. Everybody from the herring plant would drive down, pick up our booze, and everybody would be dead drunk before they got back. And there'd be a party that would last, sometimes days. If the weather was bad, we had nothing to do but drink and drink and drink.
I remember about that. But do you remember about something you was doing every evening, even if it was snow, from our house to the center of the city? What was you doing every evening? What was you going to get?
What was I going to get? A packet of Camels to smoke. I
Not
smoked
at all.
a lot of cigarettes at that time.
Not just Camel bread. You had in that time a kind of habit. Every evening you was going to town to take a bar of chocolate.
Bar of chocolate, of course. I forgot.
Every night, and you were saying to me that it can rain, it can snow, it can be anything. I will walk to the city to get my bar of chocolate.
Well, I do like a little bit of luxury in life, and for me at that time, we were very poor. My parents weren't very rich, so for me, the height of luxury was a bar of chocolate.
It's true, it was
So I
very
was earning
important.
money there. I was working sometimes 18, 20 hours a day, but I was earning money, and I thought, the biggest luxury I could think of is a bar of chocolate.
And this I remember very much about that,
And believe me, sometimes...
For me, you was the man of the bar of chocolate.
To get to the town was
Stay.
very difficult sometimes.
Yeah, it's for that.
Because it was constantly snowing, and it was always -10, at best.
And he was walking from our villa, our house,
Yeah.
to the town
Yeah.
to get the bar of chocolate. This, for me, it was something unbelievable. I was saying, he's walking up to there, through the snow and everything, just for one bar of chocolate.
Yeah. And sometimes, if the weather was really bad outside, East German trawlers would come into the little harbour in Neskapstad,
Yeah, I remember
to
this.
shelter from the storm.
Vodka.
The first thing we did, you and me were the first 2 people in all of Neskapstad to see the boats, straight on the boats. Speak a bit of German, Good evening, welcome to Neskapstad. Anything we can do to help you? And of course they were interested in women,
Of course.
So I said, well, I can tell you where all the women are in Neskapstad, no trouble at all. We can give you the addresses of the local dance hall and where you can find women. But do you have any vodka or any cognac or any chocolate in exchange? Well, they said, of course, take as much as you want. Because these boats had plenty of booze and plenty of chocolate.
I remember this. That's right.
So we did some very good trading in those early days.
So from Akureyri then, if I remember very well, Brian, could you tell us, did we speak already in Akureyri about traveling later on together or not? Did we make the plan in Akureyri or later?
In Eskilstuna.
In Eskilstuna?
Yeah, towards the end, if I remember correctly. I mean, you know, some evenings we'd spend a lot of time just talking, you know, and there was no alcohol, no party and no fish to work on. We'd sit around chatting, and the overriding topic of conversation would be the freezing cold weather, you know. You'd have a gale outside, the temperature would be minus 40 degrees, you know, the snow would be howling around the house.
But do you have any memory about
we were
if
just
we
cold
spoke
all the time,
about-
and I do remember saying, our conversation went round to, you know, what we should do one day is travel in a hot country. And we both agreed, you know, that sometime in the future we'd meet up and travel in a hot country together. It was just idle talk at the time. But, you know, some year later, you know, when we got together again, about a year or so later, that topic of conversation came up again, and then we spoke about it more seriously, and then we started to plan it more specifically, and we decided we'd go for a trip down through Africa.
But if you remember very well, I think I went first from this Kapstader because I went to Denmark for a month, you know.
Was it Denmark or Norway? I can't remember. But
Denmark. I went to Denmark for a month,
Yeah.
you know.
I stayed on a while, till the end, almost the end of the season, and then I took a plane back to Reykjavik. I had a few days in Reykjavik, and then I bought a ticket back, a plane, to London.
So, but we didn't see in Reykjavik again.
don't
I think
so.
when I left Neskopstader, we didn't see
I think
again.
maybe not. I can't remember now. It was a
No,
long
no.
time ago.
The next time we met, it was in London.